So, as you all probably know already, Elon Musk has bought Twitter, and that means that he is now the big boss in charge. Unfortunately, I don't really think that this means good things for Twitter. I think that this means that Twitter is on the way out. I think that, obviously I cannot predict the future. I recommend against people trying to predict the future or really having very strong opinions about their ability to predict things in the future. But I do generally think that this means that Twitter is going to either fall apart completely or at the very least diminish very strongly in terms of its user base. This is something that in advance, I definitely thought that Elon buying Twitter was a bad idea. I definitely think that now that I am actually seeing what is actually happening, it makes me, I guess, more frightened in the sense that he is doing a lot of things terribly wrong. And I'm going to talk from my experience as somebody who works in software development, somebody who works in the tech industry. You don't do things that Elon does and make a good product at the end of the day. So when you're talking about a product, a program that you've been working on for a very long period of time, what tends to happen is that the project develops a kind of momentum. It becomes harder and harder to make changes, and there are a lot of reasons for that. One of those is that basically if you have a product that is on the market, it's been launched for a long time, then basically you're going to have a lot of users. And every single user that you have is going to really like some aspect of things the way that they are. So if you change literally anything in literally any app, you are going to piss off a lot of people. It doesn't matter how small the change is. It doesn't matter how unimportant it is. People will get pissed off. People will be upset that you have changed something. Add to that the fact that when you have an app that is very old, it is going to be incredibly complex. You've been building code on top of code on top of code for years and years and years. Numerous people who worked on the project at one point will have quit. And the problem is that when you have something that's that big and that complex, the problem is that basically nobody really knows the entire app. Nobody really knows every single part of it because it is so big. Every single person that you hire is going to know some percentage of it, some portion of it that is relevant for them doing their job. And as a result, everybody is kind of working on something, they're tinkering away on something, but there's basically very few people who really understand the entire thing in its entirety because you're talking about a machine that's incredibly complex that people have been adding to for over 10 years. And that also means that if you fire just like one person, potentially the wrong person for literally anything, you could just lose an entire domain of knowledge, a very specific skill set, somebody who really knows something very well, and then somebody else comes in and maybe they don't understand it quite as well and they mess things up. And so when you do something like turn over half the company like Elon has done, that means that you are going to be losing an incredible amount of knowledge about just how the app works internally and what things you can safely change and what things you can't. It also means that when you try to add new features, because something is already so complex, you really can't tell in advance how that might interact negatively with existing features. If you try to take away features, again, you don't know how that might impact features that you do want to keep. Everything is just going to be so incredibly complex and so incredibly tied together that it's very hard to make any kind of change at all without impacting the entire system. And that's exactly why when you have a legacy company that has a product that's been around for a very long time, there becomes this resistance to doing a lot of change at upper level management. That's both a good thing and a bad thing. It's a good thing because it protects the existing app, it protects the existing user base, it protects the existing monetary revenue stream that's coming in. But it's a bad thing because it means that things are not going to change as much. You can't get as much done. It becomes a lot more about maintaining this massive machine that you've already built that is already making money for you versus continuing to add more features or doing new things. And so while it is a good idea to come in and say, hey, we might be shaking things up a bit, we might be trying some new things, we might be pushing some things in new directions, that's great. But when you do things like sacrifice half the company or set incredibly arbitrary deadlines or basically start firing everybody who talks out against you, that's really, really a very, very bad sign for the health of the company and the app going forward. I'd also say that generally it's incredibly unprofessional to be somebody who is actively engaging with random people on the internet and asking them for help or guidance or advice or telling them that you're going to implement the features that they want. In general, when you're developing software, that's just something you can't really do. You do not have the luxury of doing that. And the reason for that, again, is that when you have a lot of users, all of whom like the app or some version of the app as it currently exists, then if you're going out there and you're asking for a lot of user feedback, well, yes, you're going to be getting a lot of user feedback, but not all of those users are necessarily going to be experts in really understanding all the nuances that go into, all the difficulties that go into developing an app. And so they're going to want things that don't make any sense. They're going to want things that basically just aren't feasible to do, or, yeah, you could do them, but it's going to take a lot of work and redoing existing things, and it's just not worth it in the end. So when you have somebody who is working on, for example, developing games, there has to be a lot of this discussion that happens behind closed doors. You can't just show everything to the people outside, because they're going to be very critical of you. They're going to constantly be demanding things of you, and it makes you look bad when you are going to them and not sort of like, regrouping behind closed doors and really coming up with a plan of attack in advance. All it really does is open you up to excessive criticism. Because when you say things, those become promises, and those promises then can be broken, and then people will be upset with you. So instead, what tends to happen is that you have these conversations behind closed doors, you come up with ideas for features, you kind of eliminate the features that are definitely going to be a bad idea, and then you can decide on what to prioritize, what to build, and then you can maybe eventually bring it to, say, something like a user test where you say, hey, how does this feature work out for you? Or you might say like, hey, what kind of features do you want to see in the future? You have to kind of approach revealing information about the internal functioning of the company in a very specific way so that you're not putting people off. And Elon doesn't do any of that. Elon is out here tweeting every single silly idea that comes up in his head. He's saying, hey, I'm going to do a subscription service for $20. And then Stephen King dunks on him on Twitter, and he says, oh, you know what? I'm sorry, $8. Does $8 work? And then, of course, it's not about the money. The point is that Stephen King is saying that no amount of money is worth paying for this service because that's simply not how he uses it and what benefit he gets out of it. Versus, Elon coming in and saying, oh, I'm going to barter with you. I'm going to negotiate with you. What if we did $8 instead? And then, of course, he looks silly doing that, and then he has to stick with that $8 number, even though that maybe doesn't necessarily make sense. Maybe that's not the right price point, but now that he's said it in this silly, high-profile conversation with Stephen King, he has to stick with that, even if that's a bad idea. And again, that's the problem that happens when you communicate too much with folks, because you have made those promises, you have made yourself look a certain way, and then, of course, you look bad if you go against it, and then, of course, that ends up with committing to things that are bad ideas. And this sucks. I would say that Twitter is probably the social media site that I have used the most over the past 10 years. Twitter is responsible for me meeting my wife. Twitter is responsible for me meeting a lot of the friends that I have currently, many of whom helped me get through the pandemic, not being able to leave my house and all that. Having people to interact with online was an incredible benefit. And probably the most important thing is that I have been doing a small business, online fitness coaching, for 10 years, and I have made, certainly a good living off of that, and that is something that definitely wouldn't have been possible without Twitter, because Twitter was really the only place that I really had any good sense of how to make the social media work for me for the longest time. I did eventually get to the point where I understood Facebook pages well enough that I could sort of get a little bit of a following there. I did get to the point eventually where I understood Instagram well enough that I could sort of develop a little bit of a following there. But first and foremost, Twitter has always been the social media site that I understood, that worked well with me, and that I felt I definitely had a good grasp on. And it sucks to see that going because it was kind of unique just in terms of the way that social media website interacted with the world and allowed me to interact with other people. And so I would say that it sucks because I'm seeing a lot of people flee it already. I myself have already opened up accounts on other sites. I'm definitely shifting over more to co-host, which is kind of like a smaller Twitter alternative. But even that's not the same, It's like the end of an era. It's a platform that was incredibly meaningful to me, and I really hope that it does not fall apart. I really hope that it does continue to work, and I really hope that it does not just, get completely dismantled in the coming weeks and months. That would really suck for everybody. Again, it's like people, I go on Twitter and like anytime you criticize Elon Musk at all, you'll get all kinds of fanboys in your mentions saying, like you just hated him beforehand, you're just being mean, or, whatever, you try running Twitter, or any of the stupid arguments that people make. I desperately wish that Elon would do the right things. I desperately wish that somehow Elon's version of Twitter would end up making the site a better, less spammy, less terrible place. I just really don't have faith in that possibility given the way that I have seen everything play out so far. And that sucks. So, a little bit of a different video this week. That is all for this week's video. I hope you enjoyed it. As always, don't hesitate to comment down below. Let me know what you would like to see in future videos. Follow me on other social media pages. I've got some links down in the comments as well. It'd be great to connect with you there. Have a good week. See you all next week.